It's January 20th, 2018, and this is your scripture reading and devotional for today. Your scripture reading today is Genesis 35, verse 1 through chapter 36, verse 19. Matthew chapter 24, Psalm 11, and Proverbs 2, 15 through 16. And for our devotional today, I want us to take a look at Matthew chapter 24 and get some general observations from that chapter with some specific applications for today. But before we do that, tomorrow is Sunday, and we would love to have you come and visit with us at the Church of Christ North Side meeting at 1101 Hogansville Road in LaGrange, Georgia. We're going to have for our 10:30 a.m. worship service, the lesson for that hour will be two prepared places from Matthew chapter 25. And in the evening, at our 4 p.m. worship service, the lesson for that hour will be pure preserved words. Here at the end of chapter 23, he gives this lamentation over Jerusalem. He says, "O Jerusalem, Jerusalem, the one who kills the prophets and stones those who are sent to her. How often I wanted to gather your children together as a hen gathers her chicks under her wings, but you were not willing. See, your house is left to you desolate. For I say to you, you shall see me no more till you say, Blessed is he who comes in the name of the Lord." Then Jesus went out and departed from the temple, and his disciples came up to show him the buildings of the temple. And Jesus said to them, "Do you not see all these things? Assuredly, I say to you, not one stone shall be left here upon another that shall not be thrown down." Now as he sat on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately, saying, "Tell us, when will these things be?" Well, see, the flow of the context makes it a lot easier to see what they're talking about. He had just pronounced judgment on Jerusalem, said, "Your house is left to you desolate." They came to him and were showing him the temple, and the point there is that he had just pronounced the temple desolate, and they're shaken by that, understandably so. That's been the center of their religious life for all of their life, and for generations upon generations of the Jewish people. And yet Jesus had just pronounced it desolate. So they came to him and were showing him the buildings of the temple. They were defending the temple to Jesus there. And that's when Jesus tells them, not one stone will be left upon another. It's going to be destroyed. So when will these things be? What things? The destruction of Jerusalem. They're asking him when the destruction of Jerusalem is going to occur. That's the first question. And then the second question, what will be the sign of your coming? And some people break this into three questions. In the New King James, it's given as two questions. It says, what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? So he starts answering the first question first, naturally. And he says, Jesus answered and said to them, "Take heed that no one deceives you." And he goes on and he's answering the question about the destruction of Jerusalem first. And when you follow the flow of the context in Matthew chapter 24, you can see where he finishes answering this first question and then starts answering this second question, because he gives them signs to look for this day, the destruction of Jerusalem. And you go down through here, he talks about the abomination of desolation that Daniel talked about, and Daniel was prophesying about the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. So that's what he's talking about when he gives them the signs and the things to look for. For example, you come down here and the section headings, sometimes you need to remember these section headings are put here by men. That's not part of the inspired text, because this passage is not talking about the second coming of Christ. And you read this language here immediately. After the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light. The stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Well, that's the same kind of symbolic language. You see all these references here in Isaiah particularly, and in Ezekiel, The same kind of symbolic language is used to refer to judgment on a nation and the end of a nation, the end of a government. And that's the same thing that's being used for here, the end of Judaism. And so he's answering that first question about the destruction of Jerusalem. And then when you come down here to verse 36 starts with a very important word, that little word, but. That's a contrasting conjunction. So when Jesus says, but of that day and hour, no one knows. Well, he's talking about the second question now, because they asked him, what will be the sign of your coming? Well, he gave them signs for the destruction of Jerusalem, and now he says, but contrasted to the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70 that you can see coming and you can escape from the city, you can get away from that judgment. This second question you've asked me about the second coming, when I'm going to come again, there's not any signs for that. See, it's a contrast there. So that shows that the day he's referring to in verse 36 is different than the day he had been talking about prior to verse 36, because it's being contrasted to that day. It's two different times he's talking about. The first one is the destruction of Jerusalem. The second one is his second coming. And here's the real lesson for us, because he says, of that day and hour, no one knows, not even the angels of heaven, but my Father only. And there's two aspects to the second coming of Christ here. One aspect of the second coming of Christ is that it is uncertain. And by uncertain, I mean that no one knows when it's going to be. He says it's just as uncertain as it was in the days of Noah, when all of those people in Noah's day were just carrying on their lives. He says here in verse 38, for as in the days before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage. No one was expecting their civilization to end that day, but it did. And so it says that's the way the second coming of Christ is going to be. It's going to be at a time no one's expecting it, just like no one was expecting it in the days of Noah. And so it says, until the day that Noah entered the ark and did not know the flood came, and did not know until the flood came and took them all away. Well, that's the same kind of uncertainty that is there for the second coming of Christ. No one knows what day that's going to happen. It's just going to happen one day. And the only way to be ready for something to happen that you don't know when it's going to happen is to be ready all the time. He says down here in verse 42, watch therefore, for you do not know what hour the Lord is coming. See, all through here, the uncertainty of the time of the Lord's coming. Verse 44, for the Son of Man is coming in an hour you do not expect. So there is uncertainty connected to the second coming of Christ. But there's also certainty, because even though we don't know when he's coming, we know for a fact he is coming. See here the certainty? So also will the coming of the Son of Man be. See, it's going to happen. He will come again. So that in that aspect, it's certain. It's definitely going to happen. See here in verse 39, so also will the coming of the Son of Man be. It's certain. It's going to happen. It says in verse 40, then two men will be, see, it's certain, will be in the field. One will be taken and the other left. Two women will be grinding at the mill. One will be taken and the other left. It's going to happen. It is absolutely certain that it is going to happen. Now, what does this mean? Two men will be taken. Two men will be in the field. One will be taken and the other left. That one's going to be taken to be with the Lord, and the other one's going to be left out of being with the Lord. There is going to be that separation where some will be taken to be with the Lord and some will be left out for eternal condemnation. In verse 42, watch therefore. There's the application for us. Watch therefore. The only way to be prepared for a day that we know for certain is coming, but we're uncertain when it's going to come, is to be ready for it every day. Therefore, he says here in verse 44, therefore you also be ready. Are you ready for it today? If not, we'd love to help you. Let us hear from you. We'd love to get your questions, your comments, your feedback, and come visit us. We would love to get the chance to meet you. Thanks for watching.